Welcome. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Absolutely delighted to be hosting Kristen Cooksley of hrQ to share with you some information on their recommendations to us after a great deal of work. Kristen will be following through her process and then sharing their recommendations. And I want to also share with you this morning what's going to happen with all of this work, because there has been a lot of work. It's been 3 months of a lot of collaboration with hrQ, and a number of you in the room, maybe even all of you, joined one of the focus groups in the room. And I want to thank you very much for all of the work that you contributed and the voice that you contributed to this work. It was critically important to us in HR. What will happen next is that the very large recommendation, it's a slide deck of 117 slides, will go to the University Business Operations Task Force for consideration. And so the work of hrQ and the work of the task force is going to come together, and we will work, and through the task force, we'll put forward a recommendation through Lynn Johnson, our Vice President for University Operations, a recommendation to the administration. So I wanted to share with you how the work is going to be incorporated. And I'd like to turn it over. Kristen, thank you very much for joining us this morning and sharing your thoughts. Please know that questions along the way are invited. If we start to run out of time, may I ask you to hold questions till the end, and then we'll stay as long as we need to stay to answer questions. Thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, so it's great to see so many familiar faces here today. I know I got to meet a lot of you through our focus group activities and other activities throughout the last 3 months. So I'm excited to be here today and share with you our findings and recommendations as a result of all our work together. So as Diana had mentioned, today what we'll be covering is the work that we did. What was our process? What was our methodology? Then we'll get into the organizational design. We'll be spending most of our time on this piece this morning. We anticipated that this would be where we have the most number of questions and interest, so we'll have a lot of slides in this area. We'll cover some just very general findings and recommendations. As Diana said, there's a much larger slide deck that has a lot more detail on a variety of different areas that we were able to discuss with you and uncover that we don't have time, unfortunately, to discuss here today, but will be provided going forward. And then some basic next steps in our contact information if you have any questions outside of this meeting. Yeah. Afraid to set my water down. It was the necklace. Second. Get out of my earring. Wardrobe challenges. Is that better? Can you hear it? All right. Any better there? Yeah? Okay. Well, we'll continue to move things around or talk like this. If we can't get through it. But please, it's hard for me to hear if there's feedback, so wave at me if I need to do something differently. So what was our process? What were the activities that we did? Many of you might have seen this slide already. Essentially, we talked to a lot of people. We reviewed a lot of processes, and we did a lot of benchmarking. We tried to be very thorough in our approach with all projects, in particular this one, knowing how large it was. So we reviewed data, documents, pulled multiple feeds out of the HRIS system. We talked with every leader within Central Human Resources. We conducted focus groups, giving opportunities for everyone within Human Resources to speak to us. We conducted what we call external collaborator interviews for folks that interact frequently with Human Resources. We conducted focus groups for a lot of various stakeholder groups. We really tried to cast a wide net to make sure that anybody who wanted to have a voice in this project was able to have one. And then we assessed 5 key process areas, a couple different areas where they're just general methodologies, and then did some benchmarking. So I can still hear some of this feedback. Oh. Okay, otherwise I can stand here with aluminum foil. And then we benchmarked with a lot of different universities. Maybe we can hold it. Try this. So we came up with this list based on a lot of different information. There are organizations that CSU has already identified as being sister comparison organizations. So we took some of those and then we added ones that we hrQ felt were good comparisons as well. We match based on city size, type of organization, undergraduate to graduate ratios, a variety of other factors to try to make sure that we have a good comparison university, and we also tried to make sure that we are getting universities from across the nation. So a lot of work went into this. Just to add a little bit more information on how we conducted our interviews and our focus groups. This is an established process that we use. We, of course, wanted to speak with everybody within human resources, but how do we identify who to speak with outside of human resources? So we look for what we call key collaborators. Those are people that might be high volume users, if you will, of human resources, meaning that you have a lot of transactions or a lot of work that you do together. It could be that you share a process. It could be that you're just a very high service user. It could be that you have a key strategic leadership role within the organization or represent a community of constituents, if you will, and wanted to make sure that that voice was represented in the process as well. So we customize our questions based on group to make sure for people, if we're talking to employees, we're also asking about employee experience. If we are talking to people who share a process, we're talking about process questions and collaboration and how those handoffs work. But we do this to make sure that we are covering multiple different areas from strategy and metrics through service expectations and everything in between. For our process assessment approach, what we did is we took the work of the task force who had created a very long list of HR processes for consideration. We also took feedback that we gathered in our discussions within human resources and some of our initial collaborator interviews to say, okay, these are the processes that we should really focus on. And then through our focus groups, for those of you who participated in the focus groups, we did voting exercises, and we were able to narrow that down from a long list to a short list, and we brought that list to senior leaders within human resources to say, is this the right list, and should we add any? We wound up adding some around payroll processing. So we have 4 core areas. Of course, within search, AP classification was by far and wide the biggest area of concern and interest from folks, and so we'll talk just a little bit more about that when we get to that section. And then 2 areas where it was not necessarily process but methodology. So we talked about what's happening today, what should happen in the future for the specific process areas. We mapped the as-is and then have recommendations for the to-be processes as well. Again, that's long, boring flow chart, so we're not going to spend our time this morning there. I'll put you all to sleep with that, but I'll cover some highlights. One question was asked in one of our previous meetings is, okay, well, that's the core list that you assessed. What would come next? And based on voting, this would be the phase 2 or second tier processes for investigation, again, based on the feedback that you provided to us or those of you who participated in the focus groups provided to us in terms of their voting. Any questions on this so far?
Just forget to adjust the microphone.
Oh, okay.
It's an important conversation.
Can I have you hold it, Lisa? Sorry, holding it closer. Testing.
So why don't you go ahead and attach it?
Okay.
Yeah. For your hair.
Test. It's better, right? Less feedback or still feedback? Still feedback. Right, how's that? Is the feedback better? Feedback resolved? Seems like seeing head nods. Now do we have volume? Okay, and volume. That sounds pretty good to me. How about back there? Good volume? Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Fantastic, thank you. So any questions on how we came to the list of processes to do our additional assessment work? And please do share questions as we go throughout this material. You don't have to save them to the end. So what are some highlights? The search obviously came up as a key area. Everybody is very focused on how talent is acquired and brought into this organization. So again, this is just highlights. It's not our process flows or process recommendations, but one thing we did notice is that year over year, there's an increasing trend. More people are being brought into the organization. There's more hiring activity. Hasn't necessarily been added resources within Central Human Resources to accommodate that. When we looked and did some of our benchmarking work, one thing we observed is that many organizations are using HR business partners to help educate and inform the process. So really having a consultative partner out there to help shepherd the process. That there's a talent acquisition function, a recruiting function, really driving and managing the process, if you will. Right, there's just the simple process steps of getting through it. Good work. That the Office of Equal Opportunity was not involved in AP search, only from a training standpoint. So empower their knowledge into the search committee and let the search committees do their thing. And a peeling back of approvals, so really focusing on what are the essential approvals. Do we need to approve a beginning and a draft and the final as well, or do we just need to approve the final or just the beginning concept? So thinking through that piece. As a result, there's a cleaner process. There are fewer people involved, right? A shorter swim lane, and there's more dedicated support. As such, you can see better service, faster talent acquisition times. And so our recommendations related to this process reflect a lot of those things. Any questions on search? I know it's very high level. So yes. No, internal, there will be internal service partners as part of the Central Human Resources organization in most cases. And there's some cases where you might have an external HR liaison type of generalist helping with that, but in most cases it's an HR business partner who really understands talent within the organization, within their specific stakeholder group, to say, what is it that we need in order to build out this team? We need two of this junior resource, or we need a more senior resource, and really helping from that talent planning perspective, as well as really helping to identify what that talent acquisition setup, if you will, should look like, because obviously you never want to settle when you're recruiting, and making sure that you have somebody helping provide that really strategic level support and helping guide the process. Sure.
Kristen?
Sure.
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question for the people on video conferencing so they can hear?
Sure. The first question was if HR business partners were part of Central Human Resources or if they were external to the organization. And I'm sorry, your second question? Yes. 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 So we spoke with many organizations out there. We also, we spoke to about 7 organizations that were identified to be the comparison universities ahead of time. We also did additional research out there to find other high-performing universities to see was OEO, or what role did OEO have in their search process. Was there another question over here?
I just wanted to clarify whether this is currently at CSU.
So the question now was if this is current state or what we are recommending, and this is what we are recommending. So current state, we do have OEO involved. We know that they're a fast, efficient group, but if they have 3 approvals, that's still 24-hour turnaround, that's still 3 days you can shave off a process. So that's one example. The other example is just generally across the board, what we see when we look outside, whether it's private sector or in our benchmarking conversations, a different philosophical approach to human resources. And that is through empowerment, through knowledge, through imparting HR knowledge and expertise into the constituents to help the people who are users of HR services perform human resources better on their own, right? So they're able to, they understand what the process is and how to do it. They understand where to go for help. So it's really through that empowerment and through imparting that knowledge that you gain additional efficiency, you build additional trust within the organization. And so this is one area where we would see an application for that. Another key area is around AP classification. So by far and wide, this is where there was interest. What I wanted to do is take a step back first and talk about the AP Framework project. For those of you who might not be familiar with that project, it was a project started several years ago to create that job architecture and eventually compensation system that would support the administrative professional type of employee. So I want to back up and talk a little bit more about this type of project in general. The reason is because it directly impacts what we see as your current state of AP classification. A job architecture project, when you're creating a new system of organization for positions and tying pay bands to it, these, under the best of circumstances, are tough projects. And because of that, it's best to treat them as a project, to staff up, to efficiently and effectively get the work done as quickly as possible, between 4 months to a year, typically, depending on the size of the organization. Obviously, there's a little room on the ends to accommodate different situational factors, but that's generally how you'd want to approach it. You'd typically get outside support, not just for the design, but also for the implementation, because it is so much work. You would also have a dedicated training and change management team to support this type of project, because it impacts everybody. Nobody likes to be put in a box tinkering with people's salary, and it can be confusing, and as such, you need a lot of support to get it done. I know this because we, hrQ, we do this. I've sat on these projects, and I know they're hard. Now, through our research and discussions, what we've understood is that it was not anybody's decision within HR today, but many years ago, a different approach was taken. We call it an as-you-go approach, right? And so did receive outside support to help create the architecture, the overall job architecture classification system, and referring largely to the AP the job type. But the as-you-go approach without a dedicated training and change management team has caused, I think, a lot of confusion and has been the most significant core breakdown in service that we've seen across all the different processes that we looked at. So what has happened is that in some cases, there may be positions that were kind of grandfathered in to the old system, but then somebody who doesn't have full visibility, it looks like an inconsistency, when maybe there was a policy decision, we'll grandfather these types of positions into the old system or old title, but we'll do it differently going forward. Or if maybe 3 or 4 years ago, different people were in place to do the work, they might have had a slightly different idea about how this particular classification system works and made decisions accordingly. Now you have new people, again, trying to follow the same guidance, but perhaps with slightly different light, again, without communication and training to help, and again, a shorter timeline. These things look like inconsistencies without a lot of communication and training behind it. It can cause, again, a breakdown of trust. And why is this happening? So for a lot of different reasons, our key recommendation, because the classification step within the search process is 6 to 8 weeks, that's too long. we can start, again, we looked at benchmark organizations. They're not a whole lot shorter, but part of the reason why it's taking so long right now is haven't staffed up to support the workload. So this is the area where there's this most significant backlog of work. Again, typically you'd have outside support helping to do a lot of this classification and kind of getting it out, ripping the Band-Aid off quickly. So our recommendation here is to pursue outside support, to do quick audit, not a full audit, but to see, has it been applied as designed? Is it working? To beef up the change in communications that go along with the project, to involve people where they need to be involved, and to go ahead and get it done with the associated pay bands, right? That's the whole point of doing these are good things to do. You want the job architecture with associated pay bands. Great to pay equity within an organization, it's very important. It also helps create career mobility. There's a lot of good things that come of it. It's a great thing for an organization to have, but just want to do it and get it done. And so that there's more ongoing maintenance required of the organization rather than the required of the existing. Any questions on this piece? Yes.
Observation, accessibility by HR partners, for information, classification, so how that might help with.
So the question was regarding the HR liaison community today and being able to have more visibility into the process, essentially through taking notes and architectures and classification systems, and that is a recommendation of ours. Transparency in this is very helpful. Obviously, you want transparency to the process. There are places where you want HR experts, but it should be collaborative, right? This is something that's done with the business, with the campus, to understand the roles, to make sure that it works together. And that partnership, again, the HR business partner role is to really create that partnership. But having more visibility into the process is part of that, because again, keep finding that, it's a breakdown of trust. And we get trust back through performance and visibility and transparency. Any other questions? Yes.
Clarify what you mean.
Yes. Yeah. So when I say pursue outside support, I would say find a consulting partner to help do this work, because you wouldn't want to staff yourself for a project. Meaning this should be a short-term project, but you'd need probably an additional. Your comp team should probably be an additional 3 to 4 people, and you probably have a 2 to 3 person at least change in communications team to do this. So you wouldn't want to hire an additional 7 FTEs for project. Then you'd be carrying additional headcount going forward where it might, wouldn't be needed. Yes, so but to me, the staffing challenge is not the ongoing staffing challenge. It's the fact that you're using, if you will, maintenance-based staff, right? Staffing to support ongoing work. So where there is a unique new job to be added. To handle the classification of more than 50% of the types of roles that you have within the organization. So as such, it's created a significant backlog into the work. And also it's separated the pay and the compensation work that's typically paired with this, and essentially the point of doing, not the only point, but part of the core reason why you'd create a job architecture is to help create equity and an equal understanding of what roles should be compared with what other roles, what's required this position, and what's a senior role versus what's a junior role, and what's a director versus not a director, or what's a coordinator versus not a coordinator, and just getting some clarity across the organization. And again, those are tough because messing with people's titles and what they're used to. And so as such, having some outside help to help navigate that can also be very important. And so that hence the recommendation. Any other questions? Okay, one quick slide on personnel actions. Again, we pulled a lot of data to try to substantiate, okay, when somebody said, hey, personnel actions are hard here, we tried to say, okay, was that a perception or is that a reality? And so we pulled data. And just in the last 16 months, we've had more than 1,600 personnel action rejections. So I'd say that's a reality, right? That speaks to the frustration that's happening out there. Why would that happen? Well, there's a variety of different reasons, but there you'll see a key theme as I'm talking through these slides, that there's a need for more training and change and communication. Because if you don't have a strong onboarding process to bring people into the process, to say this is how you conduct a personnel action, this is the information that's required, we have a lot of rejections. Another added challenge to this is that HR is final approver. So the work gets through, it's not getting caught, what the issues are, it's not getting caught. Finally, somebody in HR is looking at it with a real keen eye, say, is this everything that we really need as an organization when we're following the kind of rules and regulations of our organization? And finding, no, there's something wrong with it. And then there's a rejection. And there's not, again, a strong feedback loop because we don't have staff to have a conversation after every rejected personnel action. So a couple of findings, and the reason I wanted to highlight it with just this one is that there is an opportunity to potentially shift the approval orders. HR should HR be an approver earlier on to maybe catch some of these things, so it's not 9 days after you've submitted it and achieved 9 other approvals, and then it gets rejected without that feedback loop. So that's one. And another area where we could see improvement is just by having more robust training around how to do this in an onboarding process for those people who will be participating in entering personnel actions. Then the third area is to be adding field level validation and other system configurations to help inform users that this isn't working. So much like if you're trying to purchase something online and you've entered something wrong with your credit card, it fails, right? So if you're trying to enter a personnel action, you've got something wrong on the screen, perhaps it'll fail there. Obviously, you don't just want that without the training. You only want all of these pieces together. So let's pick this one because it highlights kind of a theme of findings, because regardless of really what we're talking about, we see kind of the same thing. HR, last approver, first one really looking at it because they're the only ones that really know what to look for. So we need more training, and also maybe there's more that we can do in the system to help flag for the end user how to do it properly. Any questions on this piece? Okay, we'll keep going. Okay. The org design approach. So before we actually get into the design itself, I have several slides because I want to explain our methodology and the process that we use and why we do it. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So we have some basic design principles that we always employ. So first and foremost, we have to think about what is the strategic imperative of the organization? What are you trying to achieve? Different organizations are trying to achieve different things. Sometimes it's cost efficiency. Here, it's about talent, bringing on and managing talent from the feedback that we heard in our interviews and our focus groups. So one that's toughest, and I think why it's very beneficial to have a third party help with org design, is this second box up on the top row. The design really has to be independent of current state. So you wouldn't want to set your future design and hold back because of what you know about your current state. You want to create the design with a blank slate and say, you know what, for this organization that wants to achieve this in the next 3 to 5 years, this is what it needs. And you map that out. And then you say, okay, well, how far are we off from our current state? Sometimes maybe it's a quick change, 3 to 6 months. Other times maybe it's 18 months to 2 years, depending upon how far off you are. But you still don't want to change your final design to, based on what you know about current individuals or current state process or other things that can actually be changed. So you just don't want to hold yourself back. The other thing is you want to be able to test the design to make sure it can be scalable. You don't want to go through org redesigns all the time. It's stressful for people. It's hard. So you want to have something that's sustainable. And so we try to stress test that for various situations that we think could potentially happen and see, well, does this model actually hold up under those circumstances? Yes or no? If no, then do we need to rethink this? And then finally, we want to make sure that it adheres to best practices, just basic ones in terms of spans and layers, but also does it create internal career mobility? Does it align to the right metrics and allow the organization to focus on the right things to achieve those strategic objectives? So those are the principles that we apply when we go through the process. Now, I'll just quickly run through this, but when we say this is the strategic direction of the organization, then we map out, well, what are the processes? So if we have a lot of needs around talent, well, we know talent management is an underrepresented function within the organization. So we know right there, that's just an example of one function that we would want to. We also know we have a lot of training and change management needs, and that's an underrepresented function within the department, so we want to build that. We get input from everybody. We look at benchmarking, we try to look at the data, we pull numbers to see how is this actually working in reality. And then we look at the overall level of effort required, the types of skills that are needed. So for example, we look at ratios. How many people should one HR business partner be able to support in a highly, in an effective organization where you have the right infrastructure? We take those things into account as well. We also look at what would be enablers or derailers. So what is your current technology platform? Is that helping you or hindering you? What is your current organizational culture? Are you set up to work in a collaborative environment or not? So we take these factors into consideration as well. Then we look to start to align functions. So where people are focused, where your key metric, your key performance indicator should be service. We map the groups that are focused and should be measured on service together. If it is on cost efficiency or process efficiency, we would map those groups together. And the very last step there is we do look at things overall like cost. And so this is where we ask ourselves, okay, well, does it make sense to have payroll in-house or would we outsource it? And other similar questions. So that we're not only making the right design for the organization, but we're also saying, hey, this also makes the most sense from a financial perspective as well. So financial and strategic, right? And we start with strategic, but we also have to do our double check at the end to say, does this really make sense? Any questions on the process before I continue? Okay. What we heard from our focus groups, so overwhelmingly, that there, very consistent feedback that there needs to be more transparency, your point earlier, and trust, and that we need improved service and performance, in particular on the transactional activities, but that we need to really focus on talent acquisition as well. So that was very consistent feedback. Somewhat inconsistent feedback when we ask questions about what should be self-service or what should be centralized or what should be decentralized. But generally, I'd say, and we would agree with this, that it makes sense that there's a process that can be performed by the individual, self-service, that's what we heard the desire was and what we would want to map to. So again, empowering knowledge to the end user to make sure that if I'm just performing a personnel action, I know how to do it, I can get it done in the system, do it myself, and I don't need to call somebody. But if it's a more difficult, complicated, unique, high-risk situation, I want to be able to talk to somebody, a subject matter expert, be able to get the help when I need it. And again, not consistent feedback, but some that it doesn't matter if it's centralized or decentralized, it just matters that it gets done and gets done well. So when we heard challenges to the concept of centralizing, it was largely because of the current structural, current state experience with current central human resources. Not that, hey, we don't think that this could be a good thing for the organization, just we're not ready right now. And we would agree with that. But we do know that there are a lot of benefits that can be gained through centralization. I want to, before I talk about that more, I want to share with you the results of a very simple survey that we did. We had to really start to understand how is human resources being done across CSU. And we know that that's not just in Central Human Resources. We know that out of need, there are multiple groups out there. We have HR liaisons, and we have groups of HR liaisons with full teams underneath that are working to get the work done. And so we had 150 people respond to this survey. And just there are multiple slides on this as well available in the larger deck, but just a couple of takeaways for us is that we had 83 people respond that they are part-time dedicated to human resources, but providing high-level policy guidance, performance management, disciplinary guidance, talent strategy, so what we call like strategic consultative support. The question I would have is that if typically that level of support is provided by an individual who has many years of HR service, is formally trained, and we know that without, again, a full onboarding process, that there's question about how are people getting the guidance to be able to provide this information and guide the people of the university on human capital questions. So we also don't have a lot of visibility into what that looks like and how it's being done. So that raises a lot of questions. When we looked at roll-ups to see, okay, well, where are the numbers happening? Where are people being dedicated? Not surprisingly, there are some areas that are what we would consider as sort of overstaffed in terms of the level of HR support that a particular college is maybe receiving, and others that are very underrepresented. And generally, you want to see consistency across an organization. I'm not looking at it just from a division perspective or a college perspective, but looking at it from an organizational perspective. To have some consistency is good. So again, this is self-report information, but that there's evidence of lack of clarity in what HR liaison role, how it was even interpreted. And if we took the total number in terms of FTEs, there's an additional 60 people out there conducting human resources for CSU outside of the Human Resources Department, which is larger than your Central Human Resources, with no visibility into it. So from our outside perspective, that is inherently a risk and not an ideal setup for an organization. So for the HR liaison role in itself, to offer some consistency, that really there should be some training required, an onboarding process, and a program to help make sure that those who are conducting the work know how to do it and are in line with organizational policy, that have the resources that are needed in order to do the work. Potentially requiring a certain level of experience in doing the work if you're going to be a part of an independent group, right, where you're not part of a larger team that's doing the work. So again, looking for consistency and a better time so that there's visibility into how is human resources happening here. Any questions on this piece? So, as I sort of teed up a minute ago, why we are recommending a more centralized view. So, obviously you get economies of scale, you get better cost control. And what I mean by this is if we have one group of 3 or 4 human resources people helping one college and another group of 3 or 4 over here and another group of 3 or 4 over here, and they say, well, I need a performance management system. And so now this group and this group and this group are all dedicating separate time to help build something probably completely different. And whereas if the 3 groups pooled their resources, they could have one person developing one system that worked for everybody and was rolled out. So there are a lot of efficiencies there. Also, where if you have this group of 3 or 4, a group of 3 or 4, and a group of 3 or 4, you probably can't afford a talent management expert, talent acquisition expert, a compensation expert, an HR business partner, an HRIS expert, right? Whereas if you start to pool the resources, you can have business partners whose key focus is on knowing their community that they support and delivering service, but another group of deep experts who are building programs that those HR business partners can utilize and disseminate and distribute through the organization. So through that, having one process, you actually get better compliance and control. You don't need to have those same levels of approvals because you have one group that's aligned doing the same work. And as a result of all of that, you have a better employee experience. So it's not, can we have compliance or can we have service? They go together. And it's just rethinking about how the work is done. That's our first core recommendation as a move towards more centralization. Questions on this before I talk about the underlying model behind it? Sure. Question was, what level of centralization am I speaking about? And I am speaking about it at an organizational level. And this doesn't mean, and you'll see when I get into the underlying model behind it, that having business partners that are aligned to the communities, to the colleges, to the divisions, to the departments, who know the people, who know the specific needs, who understand the teams and the dynamics within each of those groups, while being still set part of a central HR organization. Their key constituents are those colleges, divisions, and departments. Yes, another question.
So will this recommendation allow for remote location or centralized?
Yes, absolutely. So the question was, will it allow for remote location or centralized location? I think it absolutely allows for remote location. And I think in practice, it's better set up that way. You want to be co-located with your people. You have better communication that way, but then there's still part of that. The direct line is still into essential human resources when this is question. They'll have the home office to really get that level of support. So that's the first core design recommendation. Whoops. What would the model be underneath it? You've heard me talk many times now about an HR business partner model. So what I'll be speaking about are these three boxes, the pink, blue, and green boxes. Oh, I'm sorry, I have another question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so the question was about those people who already know the business, the campus are already in place. Is a recommendation to already utilize those people? And I would say absolutely. But again, having consistency in what the role should be, right? So is everybody who's performing an HR liaison role right now equipped to provide an HR business partner level of support? I'm not sure, but I haven't done an assessment of all the work that's done in every one of the departments out there. But to provide this level of support, typically an HR business partner has many years of HR experience, is trained, knows employment law, so that not every disciplinary action question has to go to general counsel first. So it's really, and it's not to say that then the existing kind of part-time HR liaison role who's helping navigate process needs to go away or could go away, because there's still process work that will have to happen, right? Hiring managers are busy. They still need help getting stuff through the system. So there will always be a need for that in a large organization like this. But it's where you're getting that strategic level of support in terms of what is my workforce plan for the next 3 years based on various levels of enrollment. How am I going to handle succession planning within my group, knowing that I have 3 people who are close to retirement? I have a potential disciplinary issue over here and a potential retention issue over here. How am I going to solve those? So those types of conversations. And so again, that they are focused on knowing the people, knowing the groups to whom they are assigned, and their key metric is around service to the organization. So that's that pink box. The middle box is HR shared services. So these are the focus here is more on process optimization, efficiency, operational efficiency. So the utilization of the HRIS system falls here. The records falls here. So these are elements that are shared across the organization where it's a process that needs to be executed. Within that third level, centers of excellence or centers of expertise. So this is where you have deep subject matter experts building out programs, offering services that are largely utilized by the HR business partners to help share those programs and implement those programs within the community. So, and again, this is a benefit of centralization at a university level, because then with sort of pooling resources, you can have those deep experts. Whereas if you have small, decentralized units all over the place, you probably can't have that level of expertise. You're targeting, you have more of a generalist community. An organization this large should have specialists. So as I just teed up, this is our second core fundamental org design recommendation that we should implement HR business partners. The focus there is on client service. All but one of your benchmarked universities already employ this. It's the prevailing model in private sector as well. It's been around for many years, and it's established because it works. We also thought that depending upon because to your point, actually, we already have those people in place, we thought that it would be an easy transition as well for this organization to already have HR liaisons who are partnered with the business that could start to play that role. It's just where, where's the direct line? Separately, centers of excellence, again, focusing on program design, building that strategic level capability, talent capability within the organization. So we have three areas there: talent management, which talent acquisition is bundled in talent acquisition here. Training and organizational development, to include training, organizational development, change, communications, and total rewards, which is both compensation and benefits. So again, this is not unique or in left field. This is a very traditional model because it's established. It's also what the benchmark organizations are using, and what, from when we looked at your design from bottom up as well, led us to. That final area is the HR shared services, again, focusing on operational efficiency, that we would have an HRIS team. Shared services, the help desk, if you will, building a more robust help desk, though, that would include some IT capability, IT help, Oracle help, and HR project management, so that when changes happen, there's a new implementation, change within the HRIS system, that there's a change control process. People are involved, people are communicated to. And then records. Questions here before I continue? So a couple other functional transitions. So this is where we would look at entire units moving in or out of either a process or the organization, the central HR organization. So the Office of Equal Opportunity, we do recommend that they are not involved in the AP search process. That their role should be, much like the benchmarked organization's role is, to train search committees and to help provide advice and guidance and consultation when there is a underrepresented role that needs special recruiting efforts associated with it. Second area is to move payroll into business and financial services. So it is not, when again, we looked at your benchmarked organizations, largely it's in finance. Having payroll in human resources is of an older way of an older organizational model. Now it is more aligned with finance, and what we saw when we actually looked at the process and where people were asking for help, their help escalation path was not within human resources, it was into finance to help with tax questions and so forth. So that pairing, that collaboration is sort of already happening. And overall, we want to change the overall focus of human resources to be strategic human resources organization. Payroll is a process, and so it doesn't add to that strategic value. So there's a lot of reasons for recommending moving that out. Finally, we recommend bringing training and organizational development in. So again, benchmarked organizations, they're all doing it this way as well. Private industry, that's paired together. It adds immediate strategic value to the organization. We already know that we need more training, change, and communications within human resources. So, and add that, leverage that functional capability. So, and a lot of good reasons to bring that in. we also looked at what are the other capabilities, capacities, programs that are needed. So we looked to say, this is what the strategic the comparative is of the organization. This is what's currently happening. This is what we heard from people. We created a list. It's not in any other order than alphabetical. Some of these are programs, some of these are projects, some of these are skills, some of these are capabilities, and it's not to say that somebody in human resources today can't build, for example, an employee onboarding program. It just means that the organizational structure is not set up to create and run that program. This is a structural recommendation, not a feedback on individuals. So again, we wanted to make sure that our new design captured all of these additional capabilities, and sometimes it's just a capacity. Right? We need more of this. Also, when we're looking at capacity, we look at a few different things. We looked at the overtime report. So where is already work happening above 40 hours? Where are we already stretched? The areas that we saw were largely related to payroll, but we were able to identify some system configuration opportunities, some other process changes where we think we'll basically be able to get that time back by doing some process work. So we don't think that is that's an area of focus. We did look at work backlog, so this is substantial, right? So we already talked about this. The classification and compensation group, the backlog, the amount of time it takes to get work done there, need more support. The other area that popped up was the the central HR website, that needing to be done. It's been on the docket for many years, but not been done. And yes, your question?
It's more of an observation. Pro resources have something, but if there is a fundamental breakdown in the structures that exist, you're not going to fix anything. You're just going to add more bodies and have more bodies leaving. So you have to first fundamentally crack the management issue.
So,
and I haven't seen any of that in yet.
So there, as we set up in the beginning here, there is a 117-page deck that has a lot of. It is, and so today we're focusing on the design of the organization and some of the process findings, because that's where most of the questions have been. And for those who are involved in the task force, they'll have the full 117-page deck, and as well as an implementation plan. So our recommended implementation plan going forward, we do see that this is a huge system here, and there are multiple factors that affect the operational effectiveness of an organization.
Kristen, feel free to speak to leadership. You're welcome to speak to that in the launch of that.
Yeah, so thank you, Diana. We do have, it's actually my last slide, but I want to jump because I probably won't get back to it. But we actually, because of the dynamics here are so complicated, we actually had to build a model to be able to organize all of the findings and recommendations that we had into multiple areas. So some of those areas, I better just kind of flip to it before I, so there we go, not that far. So we have findings in all of these areas. First and foremost, leadership and HR strategy. So that within the that our finding was that there is not a clearly defined HR strategy going forward, right, tied to the organizational strategy. That needs to be very clearly mapped out with goals, objectives, timelines to support the organization's CSU's strategy. Right, so not what's happening today, but what should be happening 3 to 5 years. Within the leadership, within the organization, there's a lack of alignment within the leadership team, and as such, it's a lack of clarity for the people working within the human resources department. And where you could have synergies by having a lot of great people working together, we have a lot of people working very separately. And with that siloed, separated approach to getting the work done, it's sort of it's limiting the capability of the organization. It's not how you get a high-performing team. So, again, some of our org design recommendations are to help create a better alignment. So it all is tied together. In terms of organizational priorities, we heard so much about it's too much compliance, we need more service. Well, certainly agree, we need more service, but you don't have to sacrifice compliance in order to get service. Our model, utilizing a centralized model with a strong HR business partner team that is aligned to a central human resources function, you can get that level of compliance without having to do it through command and control or approval after approval. You can get that by imparting knowledge and trust and capability into the organization. So that is a recommendation. Systems and processes. So we have a whole process assessment. I've just touched on a few of them there. And so in many cases, there's a theme. HR shouldn't be the first group to be looking at something submitted with real quality view. That should be happening earlier, or HR should be viewing the process, be approving it in earlier stages. In other places, there are it's a training issue. People don't know how to use the process, and it's very simple and straightforward. In other places, it's the trust of the system. So we have extra work happening outside the system because we don't trust the system. General system findings are that it's not a modern system, but you are asking for modern human resources. So a modern system would have employee self-service, might be cloud-based, would have better integration of data. There'd be a lot of benefits to be gained from enhancing the underlying HRIS system that is being utilized to support the work. Technology should facilitate the process, but in many cases, it's sort of hampering the process. Again, it's not necessarily that the issue is the version of Oracle. In some cases, it's configuration. It's not configured properly. But to reconfigure the system, that's effort. That takes a lot of people. That takes HR project management, and then it takes an associated training and change management effort to make sure that anything is changed in the system. People know how to do that. The HR employee experience, I sort of already tapped into this, but there's not a whole lot of career mobility within the group. The lack of alignment at the leadership level is challenging the focus on just trying to keep up, right? So there is awareness that there's frustration across the university to the team, and that the team is working very hard on processes that aren't delivering what the organization really needs. So it's sort of this place where people are working really hard and trying to just get the work done, but it's not necessarily the work that's most beneficial to the organization. And to just keep up with the day-to-day, but not have an aligned leadership team that's empowering them to drive continuous improvement. The focus is, as understandably as it would be for anybody who's in that situation, heads down, let's get the work done. I've got 5 more of these to do today. Versus, how can we take a step back as an organization and rethink how we do human resources? Well, you can't just do that by yourself. You need the whole organization behind you. You need resources. You need a new organization design. You need new processes. You probably have to think about technology. It's not one thing, not just a management issue. There are multiple factors happening here. The other one, last one there, is the organizational dynamics. HR is viewed as the police, but quite honestly, they're the first ones looking at anything that gets to them. So, but the processes, the policies that are in place are set by the organization. And so someone has to make sure that, for instance, supplemental pay is how it should be done and isn't going to create an audit finding. So we can certainly do a better job training people to make sure that when they're trying to put in a supplemental pay change, that it's right and aligned to organizational policy. But if the first organization that's really going to take it and look at it to say, is this accurate and is this not going to get us in any trouble, is human resources, they'll still be viewed as kind of the police out there. But the other kind of more substantial finding is that there has been a total breakdown in trust, largely related to this, stems from the AP classification in the search process. That seems to be the most sore spot out there. But again, you see the root cause for that as the decision that happened outside of human resources many years ago in terms of how to implement this project and how to resource. So this is not one thing. And so hence we had to make this little model to help us try to explain and show how all of these things work together. And for this organization to get the level of strategic talent management, strategic talent strategy that it needs, it's going to take changes in all of these places. And one of these places is the organization as well. Yeah.
Where was the
Yeah.
there's a sense of
We're not, your job is to have our hand. Instead of this collaborative,
Right.
on the same page, all the things get to the
Yeah.
right,
Mm-hmm. Right, so,
is there
yeah,
a
so,
recommendation on sort of just
Well,
overall general?
yes. So the question is about changing the overall philosophy of the organization. Again, highlighting challenges with service experience and feeling of trust, again, within the organization. And this, what we are recommending is what we would call the transformational change, and which is why we have recommendations in all of these areas, plus an org structure and the implementation plan going forward that we would recommend. And as I said earlier, we don't think the organization is ready now for centralization. That to start with, got some quick fix process things. We have some key people that are needed within the organization, as for example, change in communication focus. We have some key projects that have to get done, get the website done, rethink that AP classification effort, then set service level agreements with you all. What's acceptable? What will work? What will work realistically? We might want it in 24 hours. Maybe we can't do that yet. Maybe right now we start in a week, and then we work down to that. We set those, we measure them. We have somebody measuring, tracking, reporting through our communication team to say, so because we get that trust back, we get that level of service back by saying, this is the service that we all want to get to, or we agree to it, and then we start measuring it. And we communicate and work together, and it's incremental. And then as we hit this benchmark to say, oh, now we're doing it in 3 days. We're ready for the next thing. Let's go, let's look at this particular process. So it has to be incremental. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, so it's
No. So, great question. So the question is, well, basically, who's the task force? And what are the gatekeepers? What happens with these recommendations? Were they involved in the recommendations? And the answer is no. We have to, for our integrity, we have to make our recommendations separately. We have to talk with everybody and hear from everybody, but collect our own data and make our own recommendations that we, hrQ, is comfortable standing behind. And then that information will go to the task force, who some of the people are the same faces that are involved in different conversations. But ultimately, that's how this organization goes through a decision-making process. And so ultimately, we're consultants, so we're not involved in that. Share with you what our findings are, how we got to them, how we get to our recommendations. And that's essentially our role. You had another question?
Kristen,
Yes.
can I just insert here? The question about who's on the task force and a bit of what is the task force, do know that there is a website for the University Business Operations Task Force. You can link to it through the Vice President for correct, Lynn? Yes, so I'll repeat it for the folks on the phone. You can link to the University Business Operations Task Force website through the Vice President for University Operations webpage. So you can learn more about the task force on the website.
To just finish up with this piece, that outer circle there are just those supporting elements that make any large group that services the entire organization more effective, and that's the communication, the change management, training, the project management. So you have to have all of those pieces. It starts with your leadership and strategy in the middle. You have these supporting elements on the outside, but you have a lot of dynamics to navigate here, and it's not one lever. You can't say, oh, if I replace this person or change this process, that I would get to strategic human resources department that's servicing the organization properly. And so as such, we have our recommendations across all of those categories. Was there another question? Yes. I did not look at OSP. I look at human resources organization. So that is, given that that's when I'm doing a finance reorganization, I look at finance organization, and I'm doing an IT reorganization, I look at IT organization. So we can get models from other types of functions, but we like to make sure that we are looking at similar type, because there's similar processes that are shared ultimately, right? And so process one that's driving a lot of how the work gets done. Oh, okay.
Issue structure.
Okay. Okay, yes.
Lynn, can I ask if you might come up so I'll get captured on the microphone? Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm Lynn Johnson. I'm the Vice President for University Operations, and I am also the chair of the task force. We are looking at three things through the task force: finance, HR, and sponsored programs. The work related to HR has been contracted a lot through hrQ. However, we do have a group that is very much focused on the HR group. So we've been waiting for hrQ to wrap up their work so that we can understand the pieces of what we want to look at have been covered through the work that they're doing. And then our HR group is going to take that point, look at the recommendations. We're going to have conversations about those recommendations. And then we've got a slate of work that we have to do following the work that hrQ has been doing. So that's that piece. We also have sponsored programs being looked at, and we have finance being looked at, and we're looking at this through four lenses. Best practices on system process mapping. So best practices is one, system process mapping. We also have structure, which I've heard a couple of comments coming around about structure. And then we also have related to structure skill sets and training. So I would really invite you to take a look at our website. We've been trying to populate it with all the information. We've been working for about 6 months. Underneath this task force, we have switched what we're going to be doing through the summertime just because we're in very a busy season for most of the people that are involved, given that we're going through year end. And then shortly after that, we're going to be hitting our federal fiscal year end, which is going to impact sponsored programs. So please take a look at that. There are ways in which you can ask questions through the website, and if you can't find a way to get to that, or you have questions that aren't being addressed, please do not hesitate, excuse me, to reach out directly to me, because what we're trying to do is going to impact the entire university, and it's important that we have all voices at the table. So I hope that that answers some of those questions around the task force. The work that is being shared with you today is very specific to HR and the work that hrQ has been doing in conjunction with a subset of the work of the task force. So I hope that's helpful.
Right, I'm not going to try to get reconnected here. So thank you for explaining that. I know it can be kind of confusing when you have one set of recommendations or what the exact path forward is going to be. But, I know from these conversations that work will happen into the fall, and so you'll have more clarity by the end of the year. Sure, great. So we only have a couple more slides. And we'll get into, really quickly, I think we left off at benchmarking. So as I mentioned in earlier comments, what we saw out there is very consistent with what we're recommending. OEO is really not involved in AP search. There's one organization, North Carolina State University. When we actually spoke to them, they said they weren't involved, but I did find one document when I was rummaging through their website that had some approvals, so I wanted to reflect that there, but in practice, not happening there either. Payroll, most often located in the office of the controller, only one organization where it's still within human resources. Do they have an HR liaison model? So mostly no, it's a human resources business partner model. You might, and one note, University of Colorado, we have up there because it's a good comparison university, but they're structured very differently. They have a central human resources that's shared across all of their campuses. So it's not a great comparison for the design or design itself of human resources, but we keep it there because it's a good comparison university. In most cases, they're using an HR business partner model. And one example where I think it's Utah, University of Utah, they do have an HR liaison model, but they report into central HR. So it's sort of like an HR business partner model, but they call it something different. Training and organizational development, where we can find information, most often located within human resources, as you see in private sector. And if you look at the employee to HR ratio, Colorado State is at the high end. Of course, if you add in all of the HR liaison FTEs, it certainly drops that ratio, but it's decentralized, so you're not getting efficiency out of it at an organization-wide level. So, what are we recommending? Probably can't see it at all. So, I think this will be posted, right? So this will be posted to look at later, but we're recommending a two-step process, right? We know the organization is not ready to get to what we think our final design would be. We do our final design from a blank slate. If we were designing this organization all over again, had no current state information, this is what it should look like. Well, this is your half step to try to get you incrementally there. So I have to kind of map in color to the three boxes that we looked at on the model page, where this area over here, we have the HR business partners, and I have the decentralized main HR liaison sort of already part of this model to address that question that came up earlier. It's sort of already working out there, just not consistently, not in every place, but we think it will work well. But building out the central human resources business partner function and initially putting your change and training positions in there, because largely the first step is to work with the HR liaison community, the HR community, so outward focus, that they would belong, that would be a good place for them will be there. The middle layer there in blue would be an associate director of HR shared services, where we would have the service center, but also adding IT help. So if you have questions about Oracle or 10 O'Clock Plus, you can get those answered as well. Then we have payroll. We have it here still because we have some work to do in payroll before we'll be ready to transition. There's a key vacancy within the role that would need to be in place in order to help with the transition. And there are also some key system configuration things and process changes that need to happen from an internal perspective before we want to see that. We want to see it sort of stabilized before we move. Records, put records over here, and then building out an HR project, so like an HRIS team, right? So not every HR project has a system component, but most of them do because, again, the system enables the process. There are some things that are just policy changes, for example, but that still might need a project associated with it to make sure that we have the right change controls happening, the right people are involved, there's the right discipline to the project. That's that middle piece. And that third area is that center of excellence. Right now, just 2 centers of excellence. That first one there is building out that talent management. So this is also where talent acquisition, which we have 3 recruiter roles right now, but we're also building out an onboarding program. So that has to happen. We need onboarding initially focused on HR liaison onboarding, but then to more broadly employee onboarding. That's kind of the start. And then that final area over there is total rewards, where we have compensation, really break compensation, classification, as well as the benefits team. So you typically see total rewards bundled together because, again, they have similar metrics, so similar functions, right? Similar, that's how employees are essentially being rewarded for coming to work every day in different capacities. That would be the interim step. Then to the final organization chart. We don't think, this would be probably at least a year away. What this does is get you down to an employee HR to employee ratio of about 101 to 133, which is much more in line with what I think we want to see out there. We have a more focused HR business partner function where we have some career leveling in here. We have senior roles, some with more junior roles. So we have some options to grow people within their career. If they want to go to an HR business partner function, another nice career path out of here is into a center of excellence, really any other area, because a junior HR business partner role starts as more of a generalist. Then you have that higher level senior HRBP that might have 1 or 2 or 3 core areas of expertise, but we do know that here you want more employment law, definitely under the principal's belt. That middle group, still largely the same, although you'll see payroll at this point would have been transitioned out. Oh, there you go. And then we have 3 now centers of excellence, or centers of expertise. Yes, you have a question?
Can you read the top line? I can't.
Sure. So this is still the associate vice, top box, associate vice president, human capital, and then the executive director of human resources, service, and operations, which is the new executive director who will be starting very soon. Oh, yes.
Let me introduce a very fun conversation. Robin Fergus started yesterday as the executive director of human resources.
Thank you.
On the left.
So colleges and divisions and HR liaisons. So still recognize that there's still a need for the HR liaison community, maybe not the need for that strategic level support, who's helping me develop my workforce plan, who is helping implement succession planning, where I have 3 people about to retire and the next level is maybe 2 levels below. What do I do here? So that level of support being within central human resources, still an HR liaison community outside. And then, so this little box down here is basically a gradual increase. We know that this can't all happen. You're not going to go from 1 to 13, or, I think our previous slide was 3, start with 3, bringing new people into the organization. But this will be where you have established relationships. Maybe you have main HR liaisons out there who are already really partnered with the organization and ready to take you the first step and kind of lead the transition, and then 1 college and division at a time, or 2 or 3 at a time. So obviously that will be sorted out as you go forward, but incremental based on seeing the service levels that are agreed to and defined and measured and reported on. And then, so this is an associate director of client service, an associate director of HR shared services, and then we have an associate director of training and organizational development as our first center of excellence. So bringing in that team, which is currently under human capital but not under human resources, but adding to it the training and change roles that were previously aligned under the HR business partner type of function. So then we start to align it more towards its function, because now we have the function in there. So you start to getting more leverage out of that position. And again, more deeper level of expertise. We know that team has a very deep skill set to it. We're building out the talent management function. So now we have an onboarding function. We have a to help build succession plans, to help build performance management systems, to help build workforce planning templates, to help really, again, programmatic building. And then we have recruiting. So that number, again, also fluctuates, but should grow as folks from the university or from campus might join, right? And so we have recommended that there's some process cleanup things there. The recruiters in this capacity are more helping manage the process itself. And the reason why the question came up, well, why is that number so low? Well, you utilize search committees. So a lot of the activities that would be happening by a talent acquisition specialist or a recruiter are sort of already happening within those search committees, but sort of cleaning that up. Say really what belongs with the organization, what belongs with Central Human Resources, right? And who's going to be best informing that process. Yeah, question.
Do those recruiters encompass both the classified and AP search processes, or is it just one or the other?
So that's a great question. The question is, what is the focus of those recruiters? What are they? And they should focus on all of it. So both on the classified, again, for career mobility purposes, you want to have that knowledge. You might start by focusing on one area, but building across. Typically, those to align to how the rest of the organization is set up. It could make sense for those groups to function more by college. Right? So one recruiter has this number of colleges, and this recruiter has this number of colleges. Again, you're getting to know your community and enhancing service rather than by type of employee. And then that final group has no change from the previous slide, that there be a total rewards, associate director of total rewards, compensation and benefits. So what questions? Yes, another question.
Is the recruiter someone that the department would have to go through prior to creating a position?
So the question was, would the recruiter be somebody who'd have to go through prior to creating a position description? So I would say no. The approval based on our recommended to be process, that happens within the college or university. Can we hire? Do we have budget? The HR business partner should be the one having those consultative conversations to say, did you have 2 associates? Did you have 1 manager to get the work done? And helping really think through what that should look like. We'll have the search committees to help define who they're looking for, but the recruiters will help manage the process, because there's still a process. There's still we still do have to confirm, hey, is this the right pay for this position? Has it been posted for the right number, of days? What's happening with this role? Kind of the tracking function. So your typical recruiter function, but more of a process. Yes, another question.
That OEO would be part of the EO coordinator that have some of the functions we're describing. Would that now transfer, like, there's still the EO coordinators that help with sort of the integrity of the process?
Sure. Sure. And the question was, how does this impact the role of the EO coordinator, where they have a lot of these functions out there? And I will say, didn't map changes to roles in an EO coordinator. That's sort of out of scope for what we were looking at. However, I would say the more knowledge that can be imparted, the better. Those recruiters should certainly know that, as well as the HR business partner. And then there's still the Office of Equal Opportunity training the people on the search committees. What we saw in our benchmarking is most organizations, they had a requirement. If you're going to sit on the search committee, every 2 years you had to take their training. And so do you need the role of the EO coordinator going forward? I don't know. And that was not something that we, sort of out of scope for what we were assessing. But certainly the knowledge that the EO coordinator has should be imparted into the search committee, into the HR business partner function, and into the recruiting function at a minimum. Other questions? Yes.
How do you foresee the HR business partners, building the connection? I mean, that model and kind of go the interim. As those turnover and change, how do they stay connected to areas? They are located, just what do you guys envision?
So the question was, how do the HR business partners stay connected essentially with their communities? And I would say it's largely through really any good onboarding process, right? So there should be an underlying process for anybody coming into the organization. Who are the people, what's my 30, 60, 90-day plan? Who should I be meeting with? Some type of knowledge transition exercise. That's at a minimum. But I do think co-location is very helpful in a model like this. You do want to be close to your people. You want to see to have your door open if somebody needs to pop in and have a question. So I think those two things can go a long way. And I also think with the way that we have tried to build this, that there could be career mobility out into the university and then back into the human resources department in different capacities. So I think there's a way to even tap into people who might not have been directly serving this population, but could serve it going forward. Other questions? Yes.
Where does employee relations, so the
Yeah.
day-to-day,
Mm-hmm.
trying to be proactive at the partner level,
Yeah.
getting off that, being aware of all
Yeah.
of that, not seeing it captured unless it's a business partner, but if it is captured as a business partner, it seems there might be an underestimation of the level of and amount of those types of things that current business partners or those out.
So that's a great question. To the short answer, yes, it is in the HR business partner function. So I know that there are two different processes out there. There's one for a state classified, which is pretty structured and mapped out. What we would suggest is that this associate director of talent management or the talent management specialist build a performance management system and structured disciplinary process that also applies to the administrative professional group. I know faculty already have its own thing as well, such that the tools to enable and facilitate the process are there for the HR business partner community. And then only things that have reached a certain level of escalation then would be you would need consultative support from general counsel. So I think that by having a full system underneath it, and again, one of my notes here is that this number is very difficult to project because I don't know the level of centralization that ultimately you all will decide to pursue. So it depends on how many people would be still within the organization to perform as HR liaisons. Also, one thing, though, that we noticed was, and it's actually in our larger findings deck under some of the kind of organizational dynamics, is that there is a sort of misalignment in expectation in what a manager's role should be in the disciplinary process. So we do see probably more here than I've seen in other organizations, maybe a tendency to want to rely on HR to handle discipline, and those who are managing the people maybe not want to have as much of a role. And organizationally, we would recommend it to change. So, but again, that's a bigger discussion. So again, a lot of dynamics to try to manage here to get that number right, but I certainly hear you and acknowledge that there's more disciplinary action that's happening out there that, that number might, need to change. Other questions? Yeah. So other functions such as diversity and inclusion is a separate a separate unit, separate department. Because that was not something that came out of our conversation. People weren't saying we have a problem with how we're integrating and collaborating. Seeing problems with, with our inclusiveness in this particular area. We really try to listen to, hey, where are people saying that this is where something needs to be addressed? And so our focus was where it touched the outside departments was mostly Office of Equal Opportunity. But not to say that and down the line in private sector, diversity and inclusion tends to fall under human resources. But again, we were talking about incremental change, and that wasn't kind of the burning platform that we were hearing when we did our assessment activities. Other questions? I know we're about out of time. Just really quickly, as I mentioned before, you want to stress test your organization design to make sure it will work under different circumstances. We only really came up with a couple potential situations that could happen, a significant non-compliance event, or if your CSU decided to further decentralize. We thought that the model would still hold up very well in both those circumstances, and one, you probably utilize a task force and some continue to resolve the issue, but the design would be stable. And the other, that the HR business partner role, if you decided to decentralize, so the hybrid model, that piece would break off nicely without shaking up the rest of the organization too much. Fully decentralized model, obviously it wouldn't hold up underneath that because it's a centralized model. But anyway, so those are the couple stress tests. As I've mentioned before, the implementation strategy, it's gradual. The interim structure should be in place. You need some key roles out there. Training, change management, HR projects, some of the key leadership positions, fixing the most significant HR process issues, develop, deliver to those SLAs, prove that you're delivering, and then kind of move to the next step. So we have a full implementation roadmap that lists out all of our recommendations and what we think would be priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3, and how those might come together. Also, again, key areas are completing the AP Flamer project, that will do wonders for your organization to get that done and behind. And again, but huge effort. If you want a good place to look, we were doing our research. UW-Madison is going through a similar exercise right now. They have a great website that's on it and doing some wonderful change activities around it. As some just additional food for thought. And then work towards dotted line reporting relationships with HR liaisons. You have to have, again, a willing partner to say, you know what, let's give it a try. And then, so again, incremental. And then we're here. So anything else? Yes, another question. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't specifically recommend additional funding, but all of this will take funding. So again, it's right. If you decide to pursue a new system, they don't give them to you for free, sadly. To do the process changes takes work. And if everybody's just kind of keeping afloat right now, getting work done, you still have to create enough bandwidth, like 10% of a number of people's time, probably a little bit more than that. At a minimum, to say, okay, now we have some capacity to even think about working on building this and improving this and doing this extra work. We do absolutely have a need for training, change management, and HR projects work immediately. Those, people don't work for free, so there's obviously resource implications there, as well as where we recommended outside support. So again, these are not our decisions, and we know we have the task force doing a lot of fantastic work on their own and looking at it in 4 different areas and have much wider review into the organization and other budgetary considerations. And this will be one input into their decision-making process. And of course, they have a review into a lot more than we do. We're really just focused on HR. Anything else? Okay, 2 more questions, Okay, go ahead.
So we talked a lot about the readiness level, structured phase direction. Thinking about your point of trust, to also build partnership, trust, communication, customer service, philosophy, all of that. Are there some recommendations made about some immediate things that can be implemented to help us to increase that readiness level and to be able to bring the group closer together regardless of the model?
Yes. So the question was, what are some immediate recommendations to help start to build that trust and that service back? So we do have some lower hanging fruit in terms of process change. That's one piece. But one other core recommendation we have are building communities of practice, which are essentially what is sort of starting to happen in some places with a few of the main HR liaisons who are already forced on this, but building stronger partnerships, because the HR liaison community has a lot of knowledge themselves. And how can we start to utilize the skills and expertise that we already have out there? And without having to build a formal program, how can we come together as a community and share information? So taking kind of a jumping off point, we have the HR meetings, the HR liaison meetings, but we took your feedback in the focus groups to hear that the format probably needs to change, and there's a bunch of different topics that people want to talk about. So how can we take that information, jumping off point of this type of meeting, and look towards creating a community of practice that could start to help that? And I do think that also starting to work towards within those communities of practice, what those service level agreements should look like to start the conversation. What is acceptable service, but what is also realistic, given, again, all of these different things. And so to me, that would be step 1. And you had another question back there, sir.
We've had some discussion. Part of the recommendation is that progress.
That's a great question. So this is related to HR systems and is a recommendation to do what first, essentially. So what we have spelled out here are some options with the current system. Now, and process changes associated with that. However, if the decision is, well, let's start shopping tomorrow, and by the end of the year, we want to have a new HR system, so if you get that approval level, then I would say, no, don't do this process work, because that'll have to happen again when you're doing a system implementation. Because you have to get some consistency in process, you have to figure out what's going to work. Your process in the system. It didn't get, from my understanding, it doesn't look like a new HR system is on that near term of a horizon, such that we were recommending to do more with what we have. The training, largely, to help understand how to use the system better, but there are some different process steps, payroll in particular, some different configuration options, as well as with some of those rejections that are happening, field level validation that we know can be added, that will help. Again, it's incremental, but to help get more out of the current system as a starting point. But again, if it's a shorter horizon, I would say probably work on really defining what the to-be would be under the new system constraints. Yes, another question.
So were the recommendations accepted in principle, and then as far as going to centralized HR, and then the task force going to figure out how and what to do?
So yes, I'll let you speak.
So I'll go ahead and speak to that. And so the way it's going to work is the work of hrQ is going to go to the task force. This summer, the task force is meeting by functional areas. So the members of the task force who are HR, we're going to continue. We've been meeting and we've been working together. We're going to continue to consider this information, and then we'll make a recommendation to the task force itself. So the work of hrQ has been separate but informed by the information gathered through the task force. Kelsey and Christy have done some incredible work gathering a lot of information. hrQ received all of that data, so it would inform their work as well. And now what's going to happen is the work of hrQ is going to go to the task force and inform the work of the task force. So we still have a bit of work to do, a road to take before there are any final decisions. And final decisions will be made in a large community context, not by small groups of individuals. Thanks for the question.
Questions? All right, well, I appreciate your time here this morning and your thoughtful questions. If you have any other questions, I'll be around here for the next few minutes. And thank you again.
Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate it.